Welcome back to a new glimpse at the hidden world of Avalon Academy of the Arcane. Let's see who today's story is about. Number 8. Catching Up. Abigail. "Good morning, Abby," came Reynard's voice from the door to the kitchen at Willa's place. Abby's head shot up from her plate of pancakes with a wide smile. "Oh, good morning, Reynard. What are you doing here?" Thankfully, she hadn't been mid-bite when he entered. "I spoke with your instructors last night, and they agreed with me that it would be prudent if we took today to help catch you up to speed with where your class is at right now. Help you get a jump start." He came to sit across the table from Abby, smirking when he saw the wonderful stack of pancakes in front of her. "Willa's famous pancakes? Hoping you aren't expecting any for yourself, young man," Willa said from the stove, a flurry of work and industry as she readied breakfast for the other residents. Reynard chuckled. "Oh, worry not, ma'am. I ate before I came. I wouldn't dream of imposing." "Such a terrible liar," Willa said, whipping around and setting a plate in front of Reynard before flipping 3 pancakes on it. "The herb garden needs weeding when you get a chance." Reynard shook his head with a massive grin on his face. "Today will not be a lucky day to be a weed in your garden, dear Willa. You are far too kind." Willa went back to her work and soon had put together breakfast for the other students who stayed at the house. Abby hadn't really met any of them. There were about a dozen of them in all, different ages, some girls, some boys, and different ranks. Willa had said the eldest, Martina, had been looking for her own place. She looked back over to Reynard, who was savoring his first bite of pancake. Abby imagined her face looked much the same as his expression of pure elation. She had helped Willa with making the batter that morning, something she said she had never done, and expected Abby to keep her mouth shut on the recipe. Honey, yogurt, coconut milk, and an extra egg, she said, were the secret, as well as leaving the batter to rest before cooking. Abby felt so honored to have been trusted with the knowledge, especially after hearing how coveted her recipe was from the other students. "I don't know where that woman learned to cook, but I can tell you I want to go study there," Reynard said between mouthfuls. Abby looked back to her own pancakes, cutting a new piece as she said, "Do you cook?" "I took it up at my master's suggestion when I was having trouble with magic other than fire. Scholar Melania made the point that something about the creative outlet and using different ingredients to make different things has a way of opening one up to other ways of thinking." Reynard took another bite and swallowed before continuing. "Every dish has a kind of ethos. A stew operates by different rules and philosophies than, say, smoking meats or baking bread. Even different stews have different concepts, rules, and processes to follow." "Did it work?" Abby asked. Reynard smiled. "Yes, actually. Now whenever I feel stuck with a spell or something, I find a new recipe to try, and somehow things seem to start making sense, and usually I get to taste something new." Abby raised an eyebrow. "Usually?" "Well," he laughed. "There have been some complete failures, if I'm honest, either through my poor execution or the ill intent by the person who wrote the recipe. Whoever decided to commit the recipe for smoked asparagus to paper must have been a truly diabolical malefactor indeed." They laughed together. Abby couldn't imagine what that would have tasted like, but took the utter revulsion on Reynard's face when he said it as more than enough to tell that it must have been quite vile. After they had breakfast and helped Willa clean up the kitchen, Reynard and Abby set out through the rolling grassy hills outside of campus. The wind seemed a bit calmer today, with a slight chill that nipped at her nose and ears. A question came to Abby as they walked. Reynard, I never really asked, where is this exactly? North Central Avalon? He suggested. She laughed. No, I mean, where is Avalon? During the initiation, you said that this land was connected to all times and places? Does that mean we are outside of... well... The thought died on Abby's lips as she realized that she wasn't even sure what she was asking. Reynard turned and nodded with a knowing look on his face. Almost there. This is something usually that isn't explored until apprentice class, but I think you'll be able to grasp it. He gestured a spherical shape with his hands. Avalon is a physical place on Earth, but its location is not fixed. When the first voyagers came to this land, it was close to ancient Sumeria. They sailed to it on boats, finding their way through the guiding hand of the three goddesses. They soon realized, however, that it would move on its own. Sometimes it would shift position in the sea, or would pick up and fly to a different place altogether. He looked to his pocket watch for a moment, considering. Right now she is over the Pacific Ocean, somewhere near the Aleutian Islands. Wait, really? Abby said, wondering what he saw in the pocket watch since all she could see was its brass case from where she stood. Quite so. I'm sure you've noticed how much cooler the air is today. He started, walking through the endless blades of grass again. Avalon roughly circumnavigates the globe every 160 to 210 days. The path she takes shifts and diverges over time, following the currents of magic. Abby found that somewhat difficult to believe. More so than, well, magic being real, and being able to step through doorways to magical floating islands. If that's true, how come people don't see Avalon all the time? Why aren't sightings a regular occurrence? Reynard grinned. Good observation. In ancient times, a moving or even flying island could rather easily escape scrutiny. Though you will find stories about a lost, moving, or floating island in nearly every culture. With how widespread and populous mankind is now, the three thought it best to disguise the island. Sometimes it will be as a cloud, or the island will curtain the land in a dense fog, and so on. More recently, she has started taking the shape of a large, ornate airship. To be honest, I'm not sure if that is more or less conspicuous than a floating landmass in the sky. Abby giggled, shrugging. Can't say so either. Even though the island is near constantly on the move in a metaphysical sense, Avalon has a connection to nearly all intersections of time and space. This is how, in a much more simplified sense, you are able to connect to Avalon through nearly any door if you have a key, and vice versa. The mechanics of how this works is, frankly, beyond my understanding at this time, but it will be something that we get into at the Magus and Masterclass level, Reynard said before clearing his throat. Today, however, we are going to focus on something much more straightforward. Something I suspect will be intuitive for you, given that you passed the test on your first try. What is that? Abby asked as they came to a depression surrounded by the grassy hills, where a circle of stones sat. Each stone was about the size of her hand and was stark white. As she got closer, she thought that they looked as though they had once been hewn into an even shape. but time had worn them down since then. Reynard stepped into the middle of the ring of stones, eyes closed, and lowered his head. Then he took a deep breath, spread his arms out, and swept them forward. Something thrummed in her as she could feel as the wind was pulled to push as he had gestured. A gust blasted the side of the hill in front of him. He looked back to Abby with a satisfied smirk. Simple, applied, intuitive control is the technical term, but most people call it free-form casting. In short, basic control of an element. It is one of the earliest applied lessons students get to help them build an understanding of magic. Abigail smiled so wide her cheeks started to hurt. "How do I start?" she said, barely keeping herself from jumping with excitement. "Glad to see your enthusiasm," Reynard said, laughing. "Let us briefly discuss what magic is first. Magic is both the force that creates our reality and is given shape by reality. It both creates and is created by its virtues. For example, fire is the source of passion, creativity, and pride. But the passion, creativity, and pride of people also creates fire and gives it form. To understand an element, you must understand the emotion or state of being that is associated with it. Someone who has never experienced anger, for example, will find it incredibly difficult to use metal magic, for it is difficult to understand that which one has not felt. Not impossible, mind you, just difficult. He stepped aside from where he stood in the ring of stones. "Come stand here in the circle. We'll discuss more after you've tried it yourself." Abigail stepped in the ring of stones and felt as though static electricity had built up all along her skin. "Wow." Reynard raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" She suddenly realized she wasn't entirely sure how to describe what she felt out loud. Abby stammered, "There's this, energy? Like, ready, waiting, power." "Impressive." Reynard smiled and shook his head. "I knew you would catch on quickly, but being able to feel the valence arcana in the circle without any training, that's not normal?" Abigail asked. Reynard laughed. "Maybe for those with a wind affinity. There are so few examples it is hard to say, but Abby, the ability to understand what you are describing in such a way is something that even some senior scholars might only barely be able to grasp." "Oh." It was really the only thing she could think to say. Once again, something that seemed, well, almost natural to her, seemed to be some kind of exceptional feat. Abby really wasn't quite sure what to make of it all. "Well, this should, make this lesson quite easy for you. You see, we bring initiates to circles like this because the valence arcana, or what is more commonly called ambient energy, is collected and focused by the stones. This makes it very easy to use magic, even for the untrained, since the wealth of compliant power so readily takes the shape that a user pushes upon it," Reynard said, crossing his arms. "We can skip the lesson on starting to sense valence arcana since you already are able to. And we can move on to the fun part, casting." Abby grinned and rubbed her hands together. "What do I need to do?" "We'll start with your affinity first, since it is the easiest place to start." Reynard gestured a deep breath with his hands. "First, breathe deep and try to clear your mind." She did so, though Abby always found the mind-clearing part hard to do. "Now, You will need to touch that ambient energy with your spirit. Invite it in. Open yourself to it. This didn't exactly make sense to Abby. How did someone do, well, anything with their spirit? Yet, as she focused on the power that was building in the circle, she could feel there was something keeping that power from being hers. It was reaching out to her, but she hadn't accepted. Suddenly, as if drinking ice-cold water on a hot day, she felt the power wash into her. Reynard smiled. Now, just give it a push to change. Let your drive for change shape and mold that power, to give it a purpose. Then tell it where you would like it to go. How exactly do I... Abby started. Don't overthink it. Just do what feels right. Natural. Trust your instincts. Reynard stepped out of the ring at that point. A breeze caught his embroidered blue silk coat as he stepped out, making it billow in a somewhat dramatic fashion. Her attention went back to the expectant energy she held onto. He had said to give it a push. Abby extended her hand out in front of her and felt the energy somehow align to match it. The power was ready to do this. It needed somewhere to go, something to give it a new state of being. You will be change, Abby found herself saying as the energy spontaneously became a gust of wind that blasted from her hand and pushed the grass on the hill in front of her against the current breeze that coursed through the endless blades of emerald green. The sound of clapping brought her attention back to Reynard. Just as I thought. This is almost natural to you. It usually takes days of trial and error for new initiates. He laughed, scratching his head. It really is hard to believe that you haven't been researching and training for this your whole life. That wind blast, while small, was better than the trickle of current I was able to make my first time trying to use wind magic. Abby smiled wide. I just did what you told me to. Be that as it may, you're the one who accomplished the feat. I can teach and instruct all day long, but it is entirely incumbent on you to actually take those lessons to heart. At this, Reynard crossed his arms. Abigail shrugged. I suppose I see what you mean. Reynard smirked. I must admit, I am rather curious to see how you do with other elements. He seemed to consider for a moment, scratching his chin. Let's try water. It is a close cousin to wind, and should be easier for you to attempt than something contradictory like stone, or destructive like lightning. I'm ready for anything, Abby said. Before she thought to draw in the ambient power of the circle, she realized that the energy was flooding into her, expectant, ready. Reynard put his right hand over his heart. This time I want you to take the power, in all of its raw, random chaos, and bring it to peace. Calm yourself and the power. Focus on the image of a still, cold pool. Serene, calm. Abigail nodded her head and closed her eyes. Peace. Bring the energy to peace. She kept trying to focus on the image of a still pool. But just as the image formed, it began to roil and churn. She kept trying to hold on to the idea of peace, but she couldn't calm herself down. She just wanted... Then everything changed. The energy became violent, ferocious, lashing out at her as an unworthy container. Abby yelped in pain and did the only thing she could think of, willing the power to leave through her hand. bolts of power sparked down her arm, and a blinding flash of pure energy shot from her into the hill, followed by a deafening boom. She fell to the ground, covering her ears with her hands, and shut her eyes against the terrible sound. As her ears recovered, she looked over to the hill, where an impact crater the size of her fist had formed. Much of the grass around the crater was on fire. Abby felt her heart drop. Suddenly, a sphere of water splashed over the crater and the burning grass. Abby looked over to see Reynard lower his right hand, a look of concern on his face. "Reynard, what was that? What did I do?" Abby asked, terrified. She walked over to him, feeling like a child who had broken a window or a priceless heirloom. He looked back to her, nodded, and spoke in a subdued, reserved tone. "That was lightning. A rather powerful bolt at that." "How did I do that? I was trying to focus on what you said. I just wanted to..." Reynard raised a hand. "That's just it. Peace is free of desire, for peace cannot exist when there is want. Or rather, metaphysically, peace is the abnegation of desire." Abby looked at her right arm, which tingled on the verge of numbness. Her coat and blouse had been ruined as the lightning had coursed through her arm. Holes were burned along the length of the right sleeve. Willow would be furious. She felt a warm hand on her shoulder. Reynard had walked over to her. "You're not hurt, are you? Lightning can be dangerous to the caster when they aren't prepared for it," Reynard said in a comforting tone. His eyes, somewhat on guard, obviously had a touch of concern. "My arm feels like it's on pins and needles, but otherwise I'm okay," she said, looking away as her cheeks started to redden. Somewhere between the intense focus on her and her spike of embarrassment over what had just happened, Abby felt it difficult to maintain eye contact. "Abby, it's all right. These things happen as you learn. I accidentally materialized and dropped a stone on Scholar Melania's foot one time as an initiate. I thought I'd never live that down," Reynard said with a chuckle. She met his eyes and laughed nervously. "This is all still very, very new to you, Abby. Mistakes and surprises are bound to happen. On the bright side, you seem to have an inclination towards one of the more difficult forms of magic to master. The sheer force and violence of the lightning makes it quite hard for most students to tap into. You have had a hard life, one where you have been in need and want of many things, but were denied them until now. Lightning is the spark and current of desire. It is the need to acquire, to break apart, to surge forward. It is change electrified into a direct, insatiable pursuit." He looked over her arm, pulling up the ruined sleeve to check for any injury that might have been hidden, she supposed. "I should have anticipated this and better prepared you. You seem so calm and unaffected by the trials you've had to go through in life that I didn't think to expect this." "So, how do I keep this from happening again?" Abby asked. Reynard smiled. "That will be easier to explain than it will be to do. Essentially, focus on the emotion or image that we discuss. Don't let doubt or frustration push you towards a want of success. That desire will contaminate whatever you are trying to focus on." She nodded. "I suppose that makes sense." Thankfully, the pins and needles feeling was starting to fade from her arm. For a moment, Abby had feared that she may have been stuck with a half-numb arm for the rest of her life. The good news is that it should only be an issue in circles. Valence Arcana so readily takes any shape given to it. A single cohesive suggestion can polarize it in an instant. When you are channeling your own power, you will find that even with some contamination from other emotions pressing upon your thoughts, accidental casting is much more difficult. The level of control and effort you must exert in order to cast by yourself is just too great, Reynard said. A thought came to Abby. That's what the sphere is, isn't it? A ball of Valence Arcana? That's why it can reflect what you focus on, right? Reynard grinned. Quite astute. The sphere is similar to Valence Arcana. Notice that you didn't have to draw in its power in order to use it. Oh, yeah, I guess that's true, Abby said, nodding. Just when she thought she was starting to understand things a bit better. It is something we haven't discussed yet. A different mode of Valence Arcana that we call Reflective Arcana. Instead of being ready to use, it shows what the user is feeling. We will actually use it later to help refine focus on the root emotions that are tied to each element, Reynard said before stepping out of the circle again. Now, Abby, let's try water again. Remember, peace, a still pool of water, serenity, and perhaps even more helpful to you, the abnegation of want. Abigail nodded and closed her eyes, ready to try again. She didn't care how many times it took. She would learn, and she would do better. I hope you enjoyed today's show. What did you think of the episode? Leave a comment down below to let me know what you thought, or leave a question for my new monthly Q&A episode. Before you go, please be sure to leave a like and share the show with a friend. It makes a massive difference in helping with discovery of the show, but also lets me know what you'd like to see more of. Check out the link tree below in the description to see all the different ways you can enjoy the show, or how to connect on social media and Discord. Special thanks to Fulfill Your Destiny for being a paid subscriber on Substack. Your contribution makes this show possible, and I cannot thank you enough for your support. If you would like to be featured in the show's special thanks, as well as other perks, please check out my Substack link in my link tree. Words cannot express how much I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to see what I've been working on, and I truly hope to see you again soon. Until next time, good fortune, good health, and good day.